The United States Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen rounded up her visit to the continent in South Africa after stops in Senegal and Zambia. The tour comes after last month's U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit held in D.C., where President Joe Biden announced over $15 billion in two-way trade and investment commitments, deals, and partnerships. The plan was for Yellen's tour to highlight the Biden-Harris administration's work to deepen U.S.-Africa economic ties, including by expanding trade and investment flows and promoting sustainable and inclusive economic growth. It was seen by many as an attempt to also counter China's long dominance of trade and lending with many African countries. Now, throughout her visit, she emphasized the rights of countries to choose their trading partners while pitching the greater transparency and lasting nature of engagement with the United States. Joining me now from Gauteng, South Africa, is Seisman Mutolong, International Relations and Political Science Lecturer at Northwest University. Seisman, thank you so much for joining me. Welcome to Business Edge.
Hi, Pelope. Thank you for inviting me today.
All right, so I think many Africans, whether South African, Nigerian, even Senegalese or Zambian, are asking really the significance of the U.S. Treasury Secretary's visit to the African continent. But specifically for South Africa, do you think her visit has any significance for the most industrialized economy on the continent?
You know, when you listen to the normal person on the street, this visit is more obscured. It's not there in their eyes, and they are not really making anything serious of it. But then the South Africa-United States relationship, economically, when you now look into this aspect of the visit, what comes up clearly is this aspect of an energy transition. As you look at where the secretary went in terms of the areas, she visited Mpumalanga province, a province well known for its coal mining. That links to this U.S. commitment and a drive for South Africa to transition to a clean energy. That's what they're looking at. And then the public response to this is on how South Africa relates with America, in that sense that they get loans to invest in this transition, energy transition, instead of grants. Then the other aspect is the dynamics of why South Africans should dump coal and take into this clean energy when European countries are in a way going back to coal. So it makes a policy dispute currently in our country.
And it's interesting because that was actually my next question. We know that the United States, as well as Britain, France, Germany, and the European Union have actually backed South Africa's transition with about $8.5 billion. But it said that the cost is going to be about 10 times more than that. And a lot of people have asked the question of how, but you've answered why that is an issue. So let's move on from there. One of the things that Yellen did point out, and not just in South Africa, is basically warning African officials about the consequences of violating the U.S. Sanctions on Russia. So while she was visiting, there was also a visit from the foreign policy chiefs of both Russia and the European Union as well. In terms of economically, who does South Africa benefit from the most? Is it the U.S.? Is it Russia? Let's even add China to the mix. Or is it even China? So when we come to these trade conversations, who seems to have been doing the best for South Africa up to now?
Currently, yes, America is very strong, and it remains a dominant partner. But you see that China has, in the past years, been coming through a lot in terms of its investment, in terms of mining and trade. We've seen over the years our steel manufacturing industries really dying, and South Africa importing from China. And what she was saying about a caution around Russia, I think it links to this Russia-Ukraine war, where South Africa, I think African leaders also, have been reluctant to pick sides. So this way of non-alignment, I think it is what Janet wanted to appeal to South Africa about, that respect the sanctions and ensure that in a way you show partiality in favor of Ukraine. And I think this is what the Minister of Foreign Affairs has been strong on, to say you cannot choose for us whom we align with as a sovereign nation. So we are free to have some relations with Russia, relations with China, as much as an equal partner we are relating with the United States.
So when we go beyond that, when we sort of look at not forcing African countries, not just South Africa now, to choose, and we look at what was really on the table, the U.S. and South Africa have a long-standing economic and bilateral relationship. I think South Africa is the U.S.'s largest trading partner here on the continent. Were there any new opportunities presented in this visit? Or do you get the feeling this visit was more of we're coming to remind you in terms of where your allegiances should really lie? What do you think this visit really was about, if there was nothing new really put on the table for the U.S.-South Africa bilateral relations?
Yeah, there's been talk about AGOA partnership, and previously we understood this is to expire and if it will be renewed and where South Africa remains. I think this is one of the things that were discussed. And another aspect that has been expressed in the media was on this illicit financial flows. You know, there's been concern about South Africa being a conduit of this, maybe even classifying it as on the list of terrorist financing. Now, Janet also came to speak to the Reserve Bank about this aspect, I think, to strengthen policy controls on the issue. Other than that, we are not really exposed to concrete agreements because, you know, these are executive terrains. They operate mostly in secrecy and they only give you snippets of what was discussed.
True.
For me, this is what I understand to be the issues that were dominant in terms of energy, in terms of policies, of the policy in terms of the Reserve Bank. And then from there on, I was listening to it and I was even thinking, could it be that this visit was not necessarily about South Africa, because she went on to visit other countries.
Yes.
For me, it was symbolic, you know, that we can't come to Africa and not go to South Africa, especially that the South African president could not make it to the meeting in December. So that is something. It was mainly a symbolic thing, but for me, it's not really meaningful because it was really nothing much proclaimed after that. So it was just a hello, hi, and then we passed by.
A hello, hi, passed by. She was in 3 countries in 10 days. So, Seisman, let me wrap with this, which is an expansion. So Yellen said that the United States strategy towards Africa is centered around a simple recognition that Africa will shape the future of the global economy. We know that a thriving Africa is in the interest of the United States. A thriving Africa means a large market for our goods and services. It means more investment opportunities for our businesses, like the Ford plants where she visited, which can also create jobs in Africa and customers for American businesses. And that's what Janet Yellen said. So we're going to see more of these overtures from the US, the UK, the EU, Russia, and China, and expanding this beyond South Africa for the continent. How do African countries make best use of this competition, or this race for Africa, as some people have called it?
Yeah, we've also had some comments here that this is, in a way, a new scramble for Africa. You see, in this energy transition, Africa has always been that home for raw materials that these Western countries require, and then it becomes also a receiving market, importing the goods that are processed externally. And for your more radical, revolutionary political proponents, there's been that argument that South Africa, even Africa itself, should now build on beneficiation, process your own goods, and then export. And we find that because of poor political leadership, poor political governance, Africa is missing out on that possibility. It remains an attaché of these global magnates and transnational companies that are really exploiting resources and human resources in Africa. We need to go back to that aspect of a unified African voice and a belief. You know, there's been a trade agreement in Africa, but its implementation leaves much to be desired. We are not seeing African countries really maximizing on that. So I think this is what it has to be looked at carefully. Otherwise, with this energy transition, we became a market to import those solar panels, those generators and equipment necessary for us to thrive, because even our public infrastructure is collapsing. Electricity supply is very disturbed, and companies are now feeling the pinch in South Africa. Others will probably close down because there's no reliable power supply like we used to have in about 30 years or 25 years ago.
And it's a problem and something that could also lead to some really good solutions for many of us on the continent. Seisman, thank you so much for joining me. Right now, it seems once again Africa is the beautiful bride with the many suitors. But how do we determine who the best suitor is for the continent and our economic needs? Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Keep well.
All right, you too. And this tour is actually the first of an official of such a high rank for the Biden-Harris administration. And it could also signal that we might be seeing the U.S. president on the continent sometime soon. But many are saying that this is simply an opportunity or a chance to reinforce long-standing engagements and remind China and Russia that the U.S. is still quite present on the African continent. And that's it on this episode of Business Edge. Don't forget to follow us on social media. We are at News Central TV. You can go to our website, www.newscentral.africa, and also download our mobile app on Play Store and App Store. And don't forget that at 12 p.m. West African time, News Central Now will be coming your way right here on News Central. Until next time, I'm Tolulokwe Adeleru Balogun.